Well, he has a PhD in computer science, so if anyone can do it, he can. So, no pressure, though.
No pressure.
There we go.
Yeah.
Flash drive inserted. Password. Oh, look at that. It's coming up. He does have a PhD in computer science. So, do you need a laser pointer?
Got one right here.
You got one too?
Yes.
Man, you are complete. So, all right. Well, thank you very much. Let's give Dean a hand. Is that something you want on there? Can you get rid of that? There's some kind of symbol. It's kind of something's up there on the screen. Let's see. It says here, do you want to enable presentation mode?
Yes.
Yeah, but I don't know how you get rid of that. Because it's not on your monitor.
Is it on your monitor?
No, he doesn't see that error. He doesn't see that. There we go. Yeah. There we go. All right.
It's a little, need a microphone. It's a little late to wish you good morning. It's too early to wish you good afternoon. So I will say ciao. That's for the benefit of all of you from Europe. Why would we be interested in identifying which tomb Jesus was laid in? Assume I was going to say, I want to wish ciao to everybody, especially those from Europe. My question is, what is the real tomb of Jesus? Now, what does that have to do with the shroud? It seems like the shroud is independent of where it was. It can be studied, has been studied on its own. So why is there any connection to a possible tomb that the shroud originally occupied? Let me first work with some assumptions before I answer that question. First of all, I will assume that the shroud really did contain Jesus' body. That's pretty obvious. All the scientific findings regarding the shroud are very consistent with this assumption, except, of course, the radiocarbon 14 dating. However, other possibilities for dating it have been recently used to actually establish it as a first century clock. And I will refer you to this book by Giulio Fanti, who will be speaking several times through this conference. And he shows some alternative methods which really undercut that radiocarbon dating. The other assumption, which actually partly explains the radiocarbon 14 shift in dating, is that I'm assuming that the image was made by some form of radiation. some form of light or particle radiation. I will go with the particle radiation because it not only explains the image, but it can also explain the shift in the radiocarbon dating. So the reason we want to sample the tombs is to look for calcium-41. Calcium-41 is a rare isotope that hardly ever occurs naturally and would be very unexpected in limestone. And one of the components, of course, of limestone is calcium. And so calcium-40, the normal isotope that we see in limestone, is obviously going to be present. But if a small quantity of calcium-41 is detectable, that would do several things. It would maybe imply that something unusual happened, some really strange physical phenomenon, which would need further explanation. So we need to identify the tomb so we can take samples of limestone. Now, the epistemology for, you've heard that word earlier today, for identifying Jesus' tomb has to follow what I would consider modern scientific methodology. And the reason for that is mostly so that you can convince a skeptical public that perhaps there really was some anomalous physical event. I want to discount blind faith. I want to discount tradition for tradition's sake. And there are various stories that we may want to also discount that would not be acceptable, at least by modern scholarship. However, questioning 17 centuries of church tradition about where the tomb was is a very delicate matter. I'm going to do that, but I also am very well aware that that is problematic, at least politically, if not for other reasons. However, there always has been strong opposition to the current site, which is under the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem and is the traditional site. Let's look at some of the alleged burial sites of Jesus. First of all, there is the traditional site, and I'll show you a picture of that shortly. It's beneath a very ornate structure called the Aedicule within the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. There is the Garden Tomb. This has been championed by Protestants, probably not so much for logical reasons as more emotional reasons. 6 branches of Christianity share the custodialship of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I said share. I'm not sure if that's the right word. Sometimes it's been a little more heated than sharing. But Protestants have no say whatsoever. And so I don't know if they said, oh, let's go pick up our ball game and go to another ballpark or what. But anyway, it has been championed. And I'll mention a few things about that. But basically, it more recently has been dated to the 7th or 8th centuries before Christ. So that, and there's a number of reasons also to eliminate it. There's a tomb on the Mount of Olives, and I will be going into this in great more detail. And this was suggested in the 19th century by a Scottish doctor, R.F. Hutchinson, and he wrote 3 articles about this in England. That isn't really the first suggestion, but it's the first modern suggestion, and it's been picked up by others since then. We can go back to some earlier references as well. There are some other claimed sites. There is a site in Jerusalem where there's an ossuary which some people say has on it the name of Jesus, but it's very controversial. But some people have picked up with it and run with that, making a video out of it even, and a book. But the problem is it doesn't really comport with the Gospels of the body disappearing. And in any case, the shroud would never have been in the ossuary itself. That's a bone box, in case you don't know. That about a year after a burial, the bones were collected up, put into a box called an ossuary. There's a place in Kashmir, right between Pakistan and India, site of a lot of bloodshed over the years. But that's so far afar that it just doesn't comport with any of the other reports. And there is even a place in Japan, as you can see on the video there, that claims it has the body of Jesus. Well, I'm going to discount that as just not comporting with any of the facts at all. Okay, here's a picture. Here's a photo of the edicule. It's the structure over the traditional tomb. Recently, some marble tops over the tomb proper, over the limestone, were removed. And I think National Geographic even had a special on that. And so that does give access to the limestone that would not have been possible previously. The garden tomb, we just discount very quickly, but this is a common tomb, and I don't think that very many people really thought it really was the tomb. It was just like a tomb that Jesus might have been in. Okay, well, what's the rationale for the traditional site? Hadrian had erected a temple to Aphrodite to assert Rome's dominance in the 2nd century. Dominance, this was after Jerusalem was attacked in 70 AD, and so forth. And it reputedly covered the tomb of Jesus. And I don't know quite how that got started. But in any case, when Constantine the Great, who became a Christian, in 325, ordered the temple on that site to be razed and a church to replace it, it was discovered that there was a tomb there. Now, his mother, Helena, who is regarded as a saint in several branches of Christianity, and therefore presumably some kind of authority, found, quote, the true cross of Jesus. Now, there's a number of different stories here, and because they are different, I find them a little bit hard to believe. One of them was that she made contact with a Jewish person who claimed to have some knowledge of this. Of course, remember, this is several centuries later, 3 centuries later, and they uncovered, they buried 3 crosses, one on top of the other, and not just crosses, but actually the sponge and the reed that was used when Jesus said he thirst, and also I think the sign that Pontius Pilate had put over Jesus. Now, mind you, this was in the ground for 3 centuries and didn't seem to have suffered any form of corruption of whatever. So I find that personally very doubtful. But it has been recognized for 17 years. Now, what are some of the reasons that we might want to distrust Helena's selection of that location? Actually, what she was locating was supposedly the location of the crucifixion, but the tomb under the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is just a short distance away, so that part of it fits with the story. But anyway, the perishable items, as I mentioned, survived for 300 years in the ground, and Helena's choice was based on a lot of visions and signs, which would certainly not count as scientific evidence today. So a lot of researchers have suggested that those crosses were planted. Furthermore, there's really no evidence that tomb is from the 1st century. It hasn't really been examined that closely. And one of the things you have to also remember is that in 135, Jerusalem was leveled, not one stone upon the other, to use Jesus' words, and his prediction. And it was renamed. So it's a little hard to do a lot of authentic digging into the ground there and finding things. But my principal reason for disagreeing is that the bishop of the church and historian, Eusebius, argued vehemently against that site. And he was a personal acquaintance of Constantine. And he pointed out, as others have, that the only place that early Christians, 1st century Jewish Christians, venerated was the Mount of Olives. Not someplace west of Jerusalem. The Mount of Olives is east of Jerusalem. Now, what I'm showing you here, thanks to Google Maps, is that the traditional site is less than 1,800 feet, and it's less than the 2,000 cubits that were required for burial away from the Temple Mount. Now, of course, the temple doesn't exist anymore, so what I used for my 0 mark was the Dome of the Rock, currently there. And this would have been considered inside the area for burial, inside the limits for where burials should take place. And it was west of Jerusalem, which I'll come back to in a moment. So Christians venerated the Mount of Olives, the most single significant place in Christian history, probably even above Bethlehem, his birthplace. But there is a cave, an adjoining tomb, on the site of the first church building there. And note that Jesus' resurrection, not his crucifixion, really was the most significant and startling event for early Christians. N.T. Wright has made a careful study of this in the context of the early Roman Empire, Jewish situation within that empire, And the whole point of the resurrection was what really fired up Christianity and made it spread so fast. In 1870, an article was published by this R.F. Hutchinson, which I'd mentioned earlier, about the location of the tomb, and 2 subsequent articles. And because Jesus was buried near his crucifixion site, the tomb, of course, would be nearby. We know that. And the gospel accounts talk about the Roman soldiers who crucified Jesus were awestruck by something they saw. And the one thing you could see from the Mount of Olives would be the outer temple curtain splitting, which is reported in the New Testament. So, and furthermore, there's an allegorical connection in the New Testament book of Hebrews, which really identifies Jesus with the sacrifice of the red heifer, which took place to the east of Jerusalem on the Mount of Olives. And the temple was modeled very much based on the tabernacle of the Old Testament Exodus. And that red heifer sacrifice was then done there, and it was outside the camp. That's a very technical term in the Jewish literature. And so outside the camp just means that it had to be more than 2,000 cubits. And the term Golgotha, you can actually identify with the Mount of Olives, and in my paper, I've outlined all of the documentation for that. So the most likely all-but burial site is where this Byzantine church of Alonia exists. It has been destroyed, reconstructed, destroyed, and is only partially reconstructed now. But there is an accessible tomb by this cave that is underneath that church. If you look at the distances, they're right. It's more than 2,000 cubits. Here's a picture of that potential burial site. There's one other potential site that is associated with Jesus, and that's right at the top. Right now, it's actually inside a Muslim facility, but the Muslims, amazingly, allow Christians to come here and visit here, I believe, once a year, probably on the Ascension, because there's some tradition that Jesus ascended from there. And in fact, he probably didn't, if you really carefully read all of the documentary evidence. But what's nice is that there is an accessible tomb here as well, and this is a place also associated with Jesus. So, in summary, the tombs to be tested would be the Olobia tomb, which I think is probably the best bet. The traditional tomb, if for no other reason than just because of tradition, and then the tomb that I just showed you the picture of, but probably not the garden tomb. So I have 2 parting questions. If we found calcium-41 isotope, would that convince a skeptic that indeed something strange happened, some anomalous physical event, which presumably might point strongly to the resurrection? And for the traditionalist, if it was found somewhere other than the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, would they be willing to change their minds? Thank you.